Musk, like any populist, frames himself as a man of the people. You could see that if he took over Twitter, people knew it wasn't going to be a good thing. He was kind of a promoter of fake news conspiracies, but also a provocateur, especially when it comes to culture wars. He was always, dabbled in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, xenophobia, Islamophobia. And it feels like he's getting up in the morning and saying, today's news is XYZ, reply, 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 because I want this to be in the algorithm.
Does Elon Musk have too much power over how we communicate online? And is he using that power to fuel far-right, dangerous ideas? Welcome to The Big Picture. My name is Muhammad Hassan, and today we are joined by social media analyst and expert Marc Owen Jones. Dr. Jones is an author and assistant professor at Northwestern University in Doha. Over the last few weeks, he's been documenting the anti-immigrant riots across the UK and the link between online misinformation and the real-world violence it can cause. Last month, 3 young girls were stabbed to death while attending a Taylor Swift dance workshop in Southport near Liverpool. It was an incident that stunned the country, leaving many demanding answers as to what happened and who was responsible. The identity of the suspect was initially kept from the public due to the suspect's age, 17, but the vacuum of information led some accounts online to come up with their own theories. A fake name began circulating on social media, and in particular on X, formerly Twitter, backed by far-right agitators Tommy Robbinson and Andrew Tate.
That's right, somebody arrived in the UK on a boat. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knows where he's from. The media is, of course, hiding the fact that this is a 17-year-old male. They don't want to highlight how ridiculous it is that we allow military-aged males, combatants, to flood our shores. I don't see any protests in the UK. I don't see anybody complaining. Nobody's outside of the school. Nobody's outside the police station. The soul of the Western man is so broken that when the invaders slaughter your daughters, you do absolutely fucking nothing.
They told their followers the suspect was an asylum seeker and a Muslim. Neither was true, but it didn't matter. The story spread like wildfire, leading to a fortnight of violent rioting across the country, targeting immigrant communities, businesses, as well as police. Yet instead of clamping down on the harmful rumors on his platform, ex-owner and tech-mogul Elon Musk jumped into the fray, sharing far-right memes and conspiracy theories about a so-called two-tier justice system, accusing the British government of treating working-class white Brits unfairly, cracking down on free speech, and being under the influence of Islamists. To be clear, there is nothing that justifies these claims. Instead, the UK government has blamed Elon Musk himself for fueling the unrest that it has struggled to keep a lid on. And Musk, who bought X in 2022 under a mandate of protecting free speech, has instead been accused by his critics of turning the platform into an unmoderated, bot-filled conspiracy den, and that he himself has become one of its worst offenders. So, are the accusations true? Marc Owen Jones, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being with us today.
That's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You have been a prolific Twitter X user. I checked since 2009. That's when you launched your account, or at least the one that you have now. You have seen its many evolutions over the course of 15 years. You've documented a lot of it. How would you describe the ways in which the platform has changed over time?
It's a great question. I mean, like you said, I've been on it since 2009. I remember the Arab uprisings. I think that's what popularized it. And I call these the honeymoon period of social media, because if you remember, everyone was talking about social media being this kind of wonderful, slightly patronizing, but democratizing force.
Yeah, the Facebook revolution.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember, because I was studying Bahrain and I was looking at how social media was being used as a tool of surveillance. But that aside, in terms of a platform, it did feel like something new. It felt like something positive. It felt like people were using it with good faith. And by that, I mean, that it was real people engaging with other real people, and a level of interaction, it somehow felt more civil. It's hard to explain. I don't know, but then there was a period, I think, after the Arab uprisings where it felt like it had been co-opted in these counter-revolutions. Social media and the internet generally felt a bit more like there was surveillance. And then you had these kind of waves of political pressure in the US after the US was affected. Of course, Twitter did its social media companies did whatever they wanted in the rest of the world. But when it looked like stuff was going to affect the US, then they started doing things. Mark Zuckerberg was trawled in front of Congress because of alleged Russian interference in the elections. And then you started to feel like Twitter was, there was a bit more responsibility in what could and couldn't be said. But at the same time, it was still a bit of a cesspit. It did feel like a lot of the time there was trolls. I mean, I tweet about the Middle East. I'd get attacked all the time. Tweet something critical of, I don't know, Mohammed bin Salman or Israel. I'd get trolled. So it was never particularly a space where you were immune from these kind of behaviors, right? And that was always something that I criticized. But there was good things, right? They used to provide API data, which meant that they gave like tweets for researchers such as myself to study, to be able to, in theory, at least hold them a little bit accountable. They used to publish like state-backed influence operations. They would, publish the accounts that were engaging in propaganda. These things were kind of happening. And then Musk took over, and then there's the Musk era. And if you want to answer any questions about what I've just said, then go for it before I start talking about Musk, because that might take some time.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get specifically into Musk, there was always this inherent logic to not only social media but to the internet, which is about kind of unrestrained self-expression. That the internet was a space that was outside of the control of governments and regulatory bodies, where people could be themselves, they could talk about anything, where nothing was taboo, nothing was off limits. And you definitely saw that flourish in the age of social media. And then over time, as you mentioned, you started getting a sense that there were some really severe consequences to that kind of environment. And you had the rise of fake news and the Russian interference in elections, and the 2016 election in particular, which became kind of this kind of hot topic issue. But you also had other things that were happening. In Mark Zuckerberg was dragged before the Senate, as you said, to answer a lot of things. But part of what he was being accused of and what Facebook is being accused of were things like being complicit in the promotion of genocide against the Rohingya minority in Myanmar.
Absolutely.
And you saw the impact of misinformation in India, in the pogroms against Muslim communities. So there was a real dark underbelly to this idea of free expression. At what point in time did you get a sense that governments, but as well as these kind of platforms as well, really started to change the way that they were monitoring and moderating the kind of content that was available on their platforms?
Well, I think it depends where you are, right? So obviously, when it was the Arab uprisings, we quickly saw states start to develop techniques to co-opt that space, right? Whether it be, using IP spy techniques to get people's IP address, using fake accounts, social engineering, just intimidation of activists or journalists using fake sock puppet accounts. I've seen this since 2011. But I think, some of the most egregious examples, one of the ones you mentioned was Myanmar, and the kind of genocide against Rohingya, which Facebook later sort of acknowledged some role in, right? That, they basically just didn't want to spend money on Burmese language content moderators, and that allowed hate speech to flourish. But I think an important thing is and I mentioned, it's hard to find a date simply because one of the problems of these social media companies, particularly American companies, is that they have this kind of, it's this sort of data colonialism, but in this case, sort of social media colonialism, where they treat the rest of the world differently. And we've had whistleblowers from Facebook themselves say that they basically don't give as much of a damn what goes on outside the US and Europe, right? So we are sort of left with this kind of subpar tool and service in which hate speech proliferates. And this kind of stuff that would get taken down in some countries would not get taken down here. So I think the Arab uprising, as I started to see this counter-revolution, states using this technology, and when I say states, it's not just states, it's Western companies, it's foreign companies, PR companies, Cambridge Analytica, Bell Pottinger, these companies based in London and Washington are the ones often providing these kind of disinformation services. So I saw it as early as then, but I think the pressure started to build really with the Myanmar genocide. But again, I think what really made social media companies take notice is when this affected the US. So the 2016 election, again, the specter of Russian interference is what drove these changes. And that to me was a bit of a tipping point in terms of taking responsibility or seeming to at least give the idea that they're taking responsibility. At the end of the day, the companies are so massive that even if they were, resourced trust and safety, they'd still struggle because way too many people use their platforms. And if they actually made them safe platforms, their business model would collapse, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then you started seeing that reaction almost under the threat of criminal litigation in the US, specifically against some of these companies. You started seeing them react, and you started seeing Facebook increase the number of moderators that they have, and kind of very specifically take a look at labeling specific outlets and channels. You had channels like RT, Russia Today, for example, get taken down by a number of tech platforms, including Google. And then you have on Twitter this huge movement to try and deplatform some of the most egregious so-called proponents of misinformation. And there were people like Alex Jones, for example. But then eventually
Donald Trump.
Well, yeah. So eventually it ended up getting to Donald Trump, the former president, just after he had left office. This is in the height of the January 6th and a lot of what was happening in the United States specifically. And that was sort of a turning point for some people that were seeing what was happening on social media and becoming alarmed by what they saw as a very politicized, very partisan push to try and sort of clean up bad actors on the platform. And of course, one of those people was Elon Musk, who was at the time one of the most popular people on Twitter. Who was he in a social media sense, especially on Twitter at that time? And what did we kind of understand about what he thought about the world based on how he was tweeting and interacting with other people?
I mean, I think Elon Musk was always the shit poster in chief, I mean, he was so followed. And a lot of time, he oscillates between tweeting about his business, Tesla, and engaging what I suppose would be, being part of these culture wars. So he was a bit of a provocateur, apart from his business tweets and, tweeting about Tesla, he would do really bizarre things. So when there'd be a global event, for example, do you remember when those Thai boys got stuck in the, sorry if you can hear my cat, by the way. I can't do much about that.
Your cat is more than welcome to chime in.
Oh, I have 9 currently in my house. But, yeah, like remember those Thai boys got stuck in a cave, and then he offered to create like some sort of submarine to help them, and the chief rescuer basically told Elon Musk to shove his submarine up his ass, and then these Elon Musk was like called the guy a pedo. He didn't
take it well at all.
He didn't. No, he did take it well, and then there was a court case. But to me, that embodied who Elon Musk is. Right? He is someone who wants to comment on everything. He wants to be seen. He wants to be the center of attention. So he's kind of narcissistic. And when he doesn't get his way, or when people don't seem to validate him or value him, he then lashes out like a child, like a petulant child, right? So I think that's who he was. That's who he is. But that was certainly who he was. But obviously, he still didn't have that reach. He was still one of the most followed people on Twitter before he bought it. But you could see that he was increasingly railing against what he saw was this bias, this progressive bent towards social media technologies. I mean, he was pretty vocal about criticizing the quote-unquote liberal stance of, Silicon Valley and these kind of social media companies. So that is also a reflection, I think, of his growing, what I would say, his growing right-wing tendency. He's always been right-wing, but he's becoming increasingly far-right. And I think you see him almost this journey, especially as he took over Twitter. But beforehand, you could see that if he took over Twitter, people knew it wasn't going to be a good thing. He was kind of a promoter of fake news conspiracies, but also a provocateur, especially when it comes to culture wars. He was always, dabbled in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, xenophobia, Islamophobia, racism. So this was Musk. But it just feels like he's got more extreme because now he runs the algorithm. He's the disinfluencer in chief, as they call him.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to talk about pre taking over Musk. So similar to current Musk.
Yeah.
Lite, Lite.
But we already had a sense that this was kind of his character, his person, at least his online persona.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like no one thought, no one who values human rights, for example, or progressive values, thought Musk taking over would be a good thing. Everyone. I mean, when he did take over, people left the platform because of that thing. They knew who he was.
And so he comes into 2022 in this kind of hostile, very public takeover of the company. There was clearly a lot of resistance from even within Twitter and Twitter's board itself. He comes in with this mandate of trying to strip the platform of what he says is this left-leaning liberal bias and promote free speech. He really brands himself as this free speech warrior and says that he wants to save Twitter as this kind of global marketplace of ideas. How much truth was there to his accusations against what Twitter had become, and what did he do to actually go about achieving his own aims?
Well, I think, firstly, the truth behind what he was saying. Twitter had many critics, right? And many of Musk's criticisms were true, in the sense that, the company had to collaborate at times with law enforcement, but he framed that as a conspiracy. But at the same time, it wasn't a conspiracy. And I think this is very much of what the right wing will do now. They take something that might be publicly known, reframe it as a conspiracy, and the stuff that the media doesn't tell you, and the media has been reporting on it. So there was stuff that was true. There was criticism that were valid, but they weren't necessarily these kind of scoops that he was pretending. But what he tried to do and what he has done has been entirely detrimental to the platform. And I think his use of the term free speech, he's a free speech warrior, or the notion that he's a free speech evangelist is so disingenuous. We know that Musk is fragile. And just to make that point, he has removed accounts that he has not liked. There was one account that used to track his private jet, for example. And then he joked he said that was assassination coordinates. I mean, whether you like it or not, Musk, that's free speech, and you're banning it because it affects you. But then he basically fired the trust and safety team. So yes, there was lots of people who resisted Musk taking over at the company, but that resistance soon caved when he fired people who disagreed with him. And many of those were on the trust and safety team, which he completely got rid of. The trust and safety team was obviously the team responsible for basically making sure that hate speech, violent speech, dangerous speech, harmful speech on X was demoted at times of crisis, or that certain accounts would be potentially banned or flagged if they engaged repeatedly in what could be constitute harmful speech, right? So, there was that safety net, okay, that Musk got rid of, right? And obviously he said it was because he respects free speech, but again, that's disingenuous. And then he changed the verification system. Again, Musk, like any populist, frames himself as a man of the people. And of course, I'm sure most of your listeners would find it very ironic that any billionaire, particularly the richest person in the world, would claim that they're the man of the people. But this is the level of like Delulu we live in with these kind of people. He then, one of his things to get rid of the lord and peasant systems, as he called it, was this getting rid of the blue tick system, right? The blue tick system was hierarchical, right? It basically gave people who were constituted like a public figure or a person of public interest a blue tick, and that blue tick became like a cultural capital because it was hard to get. That's why it had value. And it meant that you were basically some sort of influencer, or it could. But over the history of Twitter at that point, which was long, people had got blue tick for all sorts of reasons. There was a brief period where anyone could apply for a blue tick, but they stopped that. There was people we know who, infiltrated Twitter headquarters and had WASTA or like favors, and they would get like accounts blue ticked because they knew someone in Twitter, right? So it was kind of like a corrupt system. And then, but then Musk comes along and says, I'm going to get rid of this lord of peasant system, make blue tick available for everyone. What he's saying to his followers is like, I'm a man of the people, and blue ticks for everyone, let them eat cake. But really what he's saying is like, oh crap, I've taken on a lot of debt. I'm going to monetize this blue tick system because people see it as something of value and they will buy it. And not only that, but also I will change it from an identity-based verification system, which is fine because at least someone with a blue tick has gone through an identity verification, to a credit-based system. So now, instead of validating someone's identity, you're just basically saying anyone can get the blue tick as long as they pay money. and you're creating a credit-based system which is ripe for exploitation. Similarly, the blue tick before didn't impact the algorithm. At least that's what Twitter said. Maybe they lied, but so far there's no evidence to suggest that's the case. Now he's created a system where having a blue tick algorithmically privileges and promotes your content. So now anonymous people can buy a blue tick, say what the hell they want, and have that content be the first thing that everyone sees, right? And already in my own research, I know that the people who anyone can buy a blue tick. Bad actors are buying the blue tick to spread hate speech and propaganda and have that privilege and algorithmically promoted, right? So he's kind of basically created the potential for a pay-for-play propaganda system or a disinformation delivery system that allows the highest bidder to have their content promoted. Now, if this is free speech, then it's not the free speech I want, and I call it something else. I think it's the free market of speech. It's someone who's basically saying anyone can have a voice, but whoever pays the most has the loudest voice and everyone else gets drowned out. It's not equitable speech. It's not free speech. It's the free market of speech. And Elon Musk is, again, using this pretense of being a man of the people, defender of free speech, when really what he wants is to create a platform with no safety nets to not only promote his own ideology, but allow other bad actors to pay to promote other what seem like toxic ideologies.
And there were changes as well that he had implemented in terms of his own reach on the platform, wasn't there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this comes back to his kind of narcissism. You know, I said like Elon Musk is a narcissist, but he's also a petulant child at times. And what he did, he essentially made changes last year, I believe, in 2023, that meant that he was unhappy with how some of his tweets weren't getting enough reach. So he tweaked the algorithms, or rather asked the engineers to tweak the algorithms, because Elon Musk's, as he pretends he's a techie, gets other people to do the technical stuff. He got the engineers to tweak the algorithm so that his content, his personal content, would be seen more. And now, if that's not, trying to make the platform in one's own image, which is redolent of a god complex, then I don't know what it is, to be frank.
And that, on one hand, that could have been something that was not very intrusive. Something's sort of like a content moderator on like a Reddit page where they need to communicate with users in certain situations. But instead, what we've seen from Musk is that his engagement with Twitter is somehow even more prolific than it was before, when he was just a user, and that he now has very specific and clear ideas that he wants to promote. What is Musk as a Twitter user, the most visible Twitter user or X user now? What is his voice online, and what has he been promoting?
Yeah, so I think Musk, firstly, he's now got a dog in the fight, right? So he wants to promote his platform that he owns, right? So he seems to take that personally. But I think really, again, he's using it for a number of things. One is to promote his own businesses. He has various, right? Talk that up. But recently, his content in particular seems to have been to fan the flames of a culture war. Like some of the stuff that he's retweeted that I've studied before, for example, is an account called End Wokeness. I mean, the name of the account itself is pretty indicative of what that is. It's an account that wants to kind of, end what it sees as progressive and liberal values, especially in terms of gender and other such things. He readily promotes them, when they're spreading disinformation about racial violence in the US.
And that's a verified account with a blue check.
Yeah. And there's people who believe they know who it is, but I won't speculate at this point, other than they're a known disinformation spreader. With the blue tick, and he promotes them. And I've even done analysis to show that how much does a reply from Elon Musk boost a particular tweet, and it's huge, right? It's hundreds of %. If he just replies to you, he's going to boost that. So Elon Musk is, as you said, he tweets a lot now, but he's like a curator in chief, right? He's the one sort of simply by replying or liking a tweet. It's almost like that boosts the algorithm because it's Elon approved, right? Elon approved content. And Elon approved content is incredibly problematic. And in the past 2 weeks, we've seen Musk, in addition to the US context where he promotes these accounts that are basically fanning the flames of racial division in the US, he is now fanning the flames of anti-minority, anti-immigrant, and anti-Muslim content in the UK by replying to accounts that are engaged in xenophobic hate speech. He's reinstated people like Tommy Robbinson, who is literally a anti-Muslim entrepreneur, and I say entrepreneur because I'm sure he makes money from it. But and then fake accounts like Europe Invasion. These accounts are hijacked accounts that have taken over other accounts. They have manipulated engagement. Elon Musk is replying to them, and they're promoting really racist hate speech, right? So he knows. I mean, he's not stupid. Well, he knows that by replying, he's boosting content, and he's been on a mission. And I say mission because if you look at his like tweeting habits, he goes on these kind of these sort of benders, like he just gets up and then mass replies to things that he seems to like. And it feels like he's getting up in the morning and saying, today's news is XYZ, reply, 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 because I want this to be in the algorithm. And unfortunately, I would say, generally, but certainly in the past 2 weeks, his modus operandi seems to be just to promote civil conflict in the UK and Europe. And the past year in particular, and I say the past year because I think since October, he started talking about how in Europe there's going to be a civil war. And about 2 weeks ago or a week ago now, he said the same in the UK, there's going to be a civil war. What this means, he's always replying to content that shows minorities, people of color in Europe or the US engaged in some sort of, I don't know, violence, right? They're very selective. But he is using what is essentially like the great replacement theory, this idea that white people are going to be replaced by immigrants, and in particular now in the new great replacement theory, replaced by Muslim immigrants. And he's basically, and this theory ends with a civil war, right? That's the kind of resolution of this theory. So he's literally promoting a far-right conspiracy theory that is fundamentally racist. And he's been doing this for a while, but it seems to be hotting up, right? He seems to be radicalizing himself. I mean, some people joke that he's radicalized by his own algorithms, but to be honest, I think he would have got there anyway without this.
Yeah. And speaking about the great replacement theory, this is something that was for the past decade on the fringes of the internet. And, people used to accuse Google and YouTube of having this algorithm that would naturally push people in deeper down this wormhole. But what we seem to be having now is these ideas have become a lot more mainstream, and they're a lot more apparent, and it's sometimes hard to avoid if you are on a platform like X. What has changed over that course of time? Have these ideas actually become a lot more popular than they used to be, or is there something in these algorithms that is putting them in front of people that might not normally have gotten there on their own?
Yeah, well, I think there's a combination of both, but I think it's important to remember as well, in addition to this evolution of post-truth politics that we really began to talk about in 2014-15, the idea that people increasingly are losing trust in experts, that they're finding information from alternative news sources that might not be accurate. This process has been going on for well over a decade, right? So that's one context. And you mentioned that again with some of the more traditional platforms and social media platforms, whether it's YouTube or Google, right? But there's also been a concerted attack, again, on the credibility of experts, on mainstream media. This is also part of the populist discourse that people like Trump and Nigel Farage of the world mobilize distrust in the media to gaslight everyone and to make everyone think, don't trust the media, trust me. This has been an ongoing process. However, social media has also kind of supercharged that, and it's given a lot of those people who are on the margins, as you said, this voice to kind of rally their troops, as it were. But I think, and another important, that's been going on, and I think COVID also amplified that. So COVID was a really interesting time and a troubling time, but because we know, for example, that so many lockdowns were instituted, people were spending so much more time on the internet. And, YouTube, for example, comes under scrutiny for delivering conspiracy theories to a lot of people. We saw a lot of COVID conspiracies in that time. And, YouTube would deliver people who'd watched a COVID conspiracy video, other COVID conspiracy videos. And there's argument and some research to indicate that time as well also supercharged this kind of belief in conspiracies, this distrust in traditional media, and therefore this kind of implicit trust in other alternative media platforms. So I think COVID also gave what was a trajectory down this kind of way to alternative news past and conspiracies a boost, a massive shot in the arm, which is important to bear in mind. But who knows if, for example, Elon Musk was radicalized by that. It's not clear. But there was another thing to come out of of COVID and the past few years and the Donald Trump presidency was things like QAnon. I mean, QAnon is a conspiracy theory, and it's a far-right conspiracy theory, and it has many of the same tropes that we've been talking about, right? So QAnon now is a conspiracy theory where, it's primarily believed in by right-leaning Americans, but it's also global. And they believe that there is a satanic cabal of politicians, including Hillary Clinton, that kidnap children in the US, keep them in basements, torture them to stress them out, take the stress blood to make a drug called adrenochrome. This is the maximum conspiracy level. I mean, and this conspiracy theory has been so powerful that in one case, it drove a man to go to a pizza restaurant that was part of this conspiracy, and because he believed that there was a door in there that led to a basement where these kidnapped children were kept. He went in the door, he had a gun, he found out that obviously there was no basement with children in. But it goes to show the power of this. And this might sound absurd to many people, but, there was a point, I think, where there was millions of Americans who believed in this, like during COVID, right? That is a lot of people to believe into something that sounds so patently absurd, right? And I say QAnon is an important one to mention because a lot of the beliefs that we're seeing peddled now, these fringe conspiracies, often do involve a level of white nationalism. Lots of Trump supporters are the more extreme aspects of his supporters tend to be white nationalists. A lot of the QAnon lies in these kind of ideas of blood libel that were traditionally anti-Semitic. And now, I think they've normalized in a way this belief in conspiracy or hatred. And I think the thing is that Elon Musk, he might have always been leaning that way. But I think there's been a mainstreaming of conspiracy, which was traditionally anti-Semitic. I think what's happening now, actually, we're seeing Islamophobia replace anti-Semitism in Europe as a sort of legitimate form of hatred. And I say legitimate, obviously, and it's not legitimate. Of course it's not. But people seem to be able to say things about Muslims that they wouldn't be able to say about anyone else. And it's somehow implicitly tolerated. And by people, I mean people like Elon Musk, who, going back to your original question, are amplifying and normalizing and legitimizing these narratives and also making them global in a way that they wouldn't. I think Southport's really interesting because Elon Musk has no real vested interest in British politics, but he's now tweeting about Keir Starmer, he's tweeting about civil war in the UK, he's promoting anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe, taking that to another audience, to his US audience. So we're seeing a transnationalization of these conspiracy theories. And yeah, you get QAnon in the US mainly, but you get like far-right groups in the Europe. But I think you have people like Musk who almost function as like these kind of nodes between these networks that streamline this sort of right-wing ideology into something more than just a weird QAnon theory or a really right-wing group in Germany. They're sort of mainstreaming a discourse of far-right politics, anti-immigrant politics, and increasingly, in my opinion, anti-Muslim politics. So yeah, and I think people like Elon Musk are the influencers within this ecosystem of white nationalism and anti-immigrant hate.
Let's talk about the Southport riots, because this is something that you've been looking very closely into.
Yeah.
And it kind of appears to have come for people, for those of us that weren't following that closely, come out of nowhere and expand at a level that was alarming and translate, most importantly, from online into the real world. And we saw the riots, we saw the violence that took place, we saw the way that it essentially put the entire country on a standstill as people were trying to figure out how to deal with it, as the government itself was trying to figure out how to deal with it. But take us into when you first started noticing that something was happening, and that it was kind of coalescing into something bigger than just online conspiracy theories. What were you noticing on X?
Yeah, well, I mean, first things first. I mean, yes, it was a surprise for everyone, including myself. But at the same time, the reason I jumped on this is because I know when there's an attack now, and I've done this plenty of times. When there's an attack in the US, a shooting. When we had that attack in Sydney in April in Bondi Beach, there was that stabbings by that man, Joel Cauchi. I know immediately there's going to be fake news about the perpetrator. And it's almost always fake news that he was a Muslim. I've noticed this for years. So I just went online and think, okay, I'm waiting for it. Let's see what happens. And I was even shocked by the amount of speculation, right? So, I just saw instantly that, I could just type Southport Muslim. That's what I did. because I know people are going to be making stuff up. And I just got so many tweets, and I was like, this is insane, right? So I just started to download all content that was basically saying Southport Muslim. And I could see, even compared to Australia, that the level of the engagement on this conspiracy was huge. And even then, because I was tracking, I saw it evolve. So it was not just that he was Muslim. There was like other backstories that he was an Arab Syrian, that he just got off the boat, and that he had a name, Ali al-Shakati, right? This is when I was like, okay, the playbook is here, because when you see this kind of thing, you see people speculate, then they suggest that, oh, maybe he was Muslim, maybe he's a refugee. Then the name comes, like the fake name. But the engagement was so big, and there was. I've just finished looking at a massive anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim campaign on Facebook that's been running for 6 months, right? So I've already been looking at accounts that I know are promoting this stuff. So part of me is also like, these accounts are going to jump on this. And these accounts get wild engagement. And I was like, I'm so scared, because I know, based on what I've looked at the past 6 months, that all that's required is a spark, like what happened in Southport, to then activate these accounts that are already getting loads of engagement to sort of to boost this. So I very quickly saw that there was something different about this recent reaction on social media. But in many ways, it's the same reaction I've seen before, just multiplied by 1,000, right? So you're getting real accounts spreading the disinformation. You're getting fake news accounts spreading disinformation. You're getting these weird accounts like Europe Invasion spreading the disinformation, and to a level that I've not seen before. And I even after seeing that, I was still surprised that there was violence in Southport directed at a mosque and directed at Muslims, because often you see disinformation, it doesn't result in violence. Mm-hmm. But I think it's the volume of disinformation really made a difference. And the stuff I'm seeing online is also going to be the stuff that's circulating privately. But I will say this, whilst I was surprised, I also think it's really important to bear in mind that this has been on the back of a massive Islamophobic campaign for months that I think just required a spark. And also, let's not forget that I think the Islamophobia that's been a product of the war on Gaza and the genocide is also really important, right? It's people who are manufacturing Islamophobia in order to try and remove sympathy from Palestinians by demonizing Muslims. And in February, I looked at a campaign that was spreading Islamophobia in Canada. That campaign was then tied to Stoic, a PR firm in Israel, who were working for the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, who the head of whom has become increasingly close to far-right groups in Europe. So, there's this whole anti-Muslim specifically operation going on that I've been looking at. But I just think it's culminated now. Southport was like the culmination of months and months of hate speech that then saw a really tragic event that people capitalized on. So I rambled a little with my answer, but yeah, the social media aspect was really, I think, prominent and unprecedented in scale, but it didn't come out of nowhere,
And when it comes to an incident like this, where there is a spark, as you mentioned, and there are pre-existing accounts, what happens on a platform? Facebook is just as guilty of this kind of thing. Yeah. But on X, what happens? What is the algorithm doing to take this from something that could be kind of stamped out or fizzle out naturally into something that then becomes the most dominant thing that is happening on this platform?
Well, I think it's what the algorithm is doing, but what the algorithm is not doing, right? So previously, it was pretty clear under Twitter that when it comes to such incidents like these violent incidences, certain hashtags could be demoted. Like we saw one of them in Southport, it was called Far Right Thugs Unite, calling for far right people to unite. It's mad. And that became one of the most trending topics on X. Before, that probably would not have happened. It would have been flagged by Twitter. They have like an emergency team, the trust and safety team that Elon Musk fired, who would have then demoted that content. So it might have existed, but it would have been much harder to see and certainly wouldn't have been as viral. So that's one aspect of it. We just wouldn't have seen so much of that hate speech in terms of content. Many of the accounts spreading false information, of which there were many, getting millions and millions of engagement, would have been flagged. Their tweets would have been flagged and then demoted. Some of those accounts would have been suspended, especially those accounts that are clearly manipulating Twitter, again, which there are many. That didn't happen. So you have this really kind of, and then the things that were happening was that the people who were fanning the flames, these racist accounts, were getting boosts from people like Elon Musk themselves. So you have like the inaction, there's no trust and safety to try and demote all the racist inciting content, and then you have the influencers, your Andrew Tates, but also the head of Twitter, Elon Musk, actively fanning the flames, right, and almost getting encouraged by the head of Twitter himself to do that. So you have these two competing things, and that is a recipe for virality. It's a recipe for incitement, and ultimately a recipe for disinformation and potential violence.
And virality has become something of a currency on Twitter in a way that it didn't used to exist before. And this is something that I saw specifically, over the last 10 months since October 7th, the rise of specific accounts that have really dominated and have kind of become these focal points. And at the same time, we saw, I think it was last year, this introduction by X of these financial incentives. So you could actually get money out of tweeting and growing your followers. Do you think that has kind of impacted the way that these accounts behave on Twitter and the sort of incentives that they have to go viral?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, Twitter's become pay to play, right? So social media itself, people can monetize. Unfortunately, in the world of digital media, the most shareable content is also called bad for the world content. It's stuff that makes you angry. Well, it's also stuff that makes you laugh. But the fact is, stuff that makes you angry gets the most engagement. And stuff that makes you angry is often inflammatory, sensationalist, false. It's the lowest common denominator. So basically, you've created a system where you're allowing people to monetize content that constitutes hate speech or just sensationalism. And I think that's also driving a lot of these clicks and engagement, is the fact that now people can profit off falsehood, but also, because trust and safety is gone, manipulate their engagement, right? So, Twitter, Elon Musk tried to make a point of getting rid of the bots on Twitter, but really I've seen what look like fake accounts flourish. And it's so easy now for someone to create an account, and they could just either pay for a service or maybe do it themselves if they know how, to boost their own account, to make it more monetizable, and then just keep tweeting outrageous stuff that will then get them engagement and clicks and money. And, as long as the money's going in for X, they're going to pretend that the system is working.
And as an example of this is something that you have been posting about. Just over the last 2 days, there was this incident, this stabbing that took place in London, and there was a young British Muslim man that had been kind of hailed as a hero in the media for stepping in and attempting to stop it. And then his identity then becomes co-opted online by what you say was a fake account. What happened there?
I mean, I actually, give me a second, because I want to check if this account still exists, because that will also add to my point. Because I checked earlier today. Just give me a second. Yep, still there. Okay, that's good. I mean, it's good. It's bad. But it highlights my point. But so, yeah, the person you mentioned, the Muslim man living in London, working, I think, as a security guard, stopped a stabbing attack. Rightfully drew a lot of praise for doing something really heroic and brave. Now on Twitter, or X rather, sorry, is someone used a photo of Abdullah, his name was, and they used the photo from the media, and they created a fake account, and suddenly he's pretending to be that person, which in some situations people might not understand why that's a bad thing. Starting pretending he's like, here's an interview with me, and he posts like a video to the interview with the real Abdullah. You have loads of people engaging with him, saying, oh, great job. You have journalists contacting him saying, hey, can we speak? And then you look at his timeline, and again, people are entitled to their own beliefs. That's not the point. But like, you see what his timeline is, and it's like pro-Putin. He's praising Hamas. Again, people are entitled to those beliefs. But the point here is that, in the current context, is almost seems deliberate. Because what you have then is Tommy Robbinson, again, the far-right anti-Muslim entrepreneur, retweeting this guy, who everyone's calling a hero, saying, oh yeah, look what this guy did, but still he's supporting an Islamist genocidal regime. So he's basically trying to say there are no such thing as good Muslims. Here's an example. Even this one who did something good is also bad. But it's not even him. Tommy Robinson is literally, whoever's taken up this account, it almost seems deliberately designed to basically undermine any credibility or legitimacy a Muslim might gain in the UK by saying, yeah, but they're all bad. Look at his timeline, supporting Hamas, supporting Russia. This guy's the enemy. And in another time, that's an impersonation account. That would have been taken down, right? Quickly, because it was someone faking identity. Even Elon Musk, when he took over Twitter, was like, I'm going to get rid of all impersonators. And this account is still up. And it's got millions of impressions. And again, like I said, not only is it being used to demonize Muslims, being promoted by Tommy Robbinson, for example, but it's still active, and it's potentially exposing the real Abdullah to danger. Because if you have a far right lunatic like Tommy Robinson, basically telling you this Abdullah is a bad guy, then there's a possibility that his followers, Tommy Robinson followers, might find the real Abdullah and go, "Oh my God, how dare you? You support Russia or Hamas or whatever," and attack him. So it's endangering the real Abdullah, and it's also being used as an opportunity to attack Muslims by the far right, all because Twitter aren't taking it down. And this is a really good example of just how X now is functioning in a way that just, is a kind of lawless place, but a place that seems to encourage harm. And even though, like I said, Twitter had its problems before, this kind of thing we're seeing now, just this example of Abdullah, wouldn't have happened. Or if it did, it would have been stopped very quickly.
And there was a time when the idea of having unverified identities on Twitter, anonymous accounts, was actually a tool for people to be able to express themselves, especially if you lived in an authoritarian regime.
No.
But over time, as you mentioned, there became this very obvious problem of bots, of these accounts that were pretending to be either real people or different identities. And Elon Musk came and he said that one of his mandates was that Twitter had become overrun with bots and that he was going to change it. Did he succeed in being able to change it? And if he didn't, what is the climate like right now on the internet, but especially on X?
Elon Musk definitely didn't succeed, right, in getting rid of the bots. And one of the reasons is that I don't think he wants to. But two, if you want to get rid of bots, that requires an investment in your infrastructure. And Elon Musk is trying to cut corners in a number of ways. And he will just occasionally say they got rid of loads of bots on the platform, but that's a meaningless statement because it's just really hard to get rid of them. And that's because social media companies like X, they want users. They want user numbers to increase so that they can sell that to advertisers. To do that, you have to make it kind of easy to set up an account. You don't want barriers for people to do that. As soon as you start creating barriers that would help combat bots, you're going to affect your bottom line. And so, Elon Musk, and he's also relying on computational methods to get rid of bots. The whole point of a bot system or a troll system is that you adversarial. You see what they're doing to try and get rid of you, then you create a technique to get around it. That's how it works, and that's what they've done. And I am genuinely concerned that Elon Musk knows that there's loads of bots and that he allows it in some cases because we don't have enough transparency. And we know that there's bad actors out there, whether it's PR companies or states, who have armies of bots or sock puppets that manipulate content. Who are we to know that Elon Musk isn't allowing a particular state to use their bot armies? We don't know. I mean, Elon Musk doesn't tell us. There's no transparency obligation. But I see it all the time. If you look at that account, Europe Invasion, it's a really good example. This is a racist, anti-immigrant, xenophobic, Islamophobic account. You can see the nature of the engagement it gets is ridiculous. I mean, it's clearly an indication of automation and bots, manufactured content. The bots problem, I would say, has got much worse. And Elon Musk saying that he's combating it is just nonsense. It's disingenuous. I don't believe that he thinks he's fixing the problem. And I actually suspect that he knows that the problem is worse and that he allows it in some contexts. But, we can't prove that because he won't give us the data that would help us prove that.
When you are trying to get to the bottom of, if you have a hunch that there might be bot activity that is promoting a specific incident, the UK government has accused Russian bots of being, part of the frenzy around the Southport riots. What do you look for? What are the telltale signs that allow you to kind of begin to unpack something that might not be what we see it on the surface level, but something a lot more nefarious?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, a lot of the techniques, it's becoming increasingly hard to detect bots, right? Which is again part of the problem. But ordinarily, for example, if you saw like a bunch of accounts tweeting on Southport hashtag, you could look at the metadata and look for anomalies. So you could, for example, see that if the average number of accounts created per day was 20, but then on one particular day you have 200 accounts created, that would suggest that there's an anomaly and that a bunch of those accounts might be fake because someone has decided to set up a bunch of accounts quickly to sort of to game it. But there's other things to look at. I mean, even now, anonymity is obviously anyone can be anonymous, but you look at these things in conjunction with each other. So anonymity plus, for example, a high ratio, like a ratio that approaches one of followers and followed. So if you divide the followers by follower and it's almost equal, that can also be like a red flag. There's other things, for example, sometimes fake accounts are hijacked. So what that means is they might have been created in 2009, but they might have been sold and then only started tweeting since 2015 because whoever's bought them has deleted all the old tweets, sold them on to someone. So you see like a disjunction between how much they've tweeted and from when, and when the account was created. These are some indicators. I mean, sometimes as well, you see things over time that become suspicious, like accounts that have no DMs and thing in the bio. But you're looking at all these things together, but it's really hard to get a smoking gun. And by that, I mean, there's not really one thing that will say this is definitely a bot. It's a number of things, like I just mentioned, working together that would suggest something is a bot. And the only way to tell if it's a bot or some sketchy actor is to be able to go through the computer and see who the hell is using that account. Because we just don't know. And this is why companies find it hard to control this, is because they don't know and they don't care who's using their platform.
Finally, Mark, I want to ask from your perspective, from your experience in documenting all of this online activity, the ways in which these companies, private companies, communicate and are held accountable by governments over specific incidents like the one that we have been seeing in the UK over the last 2 weeks. What is the solution to this? The wisdom so far has been to try and push these companies to hold themselves accountable, to create better ways of moderation. But that power remains in the hands of these very, very powerful tech companies. Is there an alternative to that? Is there another way of being able to, first of all, figure out what's true and what isn't true, but also to be able to mediate and stop an escalation that could spill into violence from happening outside of the control of someone like Elon Musk?
I mean, there's so many different strategies to combat this, and it depends whether we're dealing with the platforms. I mean, there's all sorts of things. Firstly, the extreme level would be to boycott, right? No one owes them money, right? Or go to another platform, but then that other platform will probably be controlled by some other tech company. I think the larger scale problem, or the larger scale way to address this, is you cannot rely on social media companies to police themselves. This has been proven to be ineffective. And we've seen in the US, Facebook only started policing themselves when there was political pressure. And the US is a neoliberal, regardless of whether you're Democrat or Republic, they don't like regulating companies. And they don't want to regulate. And even now, when Elon Musk took over Twitter and disbanded Trust and Safety, you had Meta saying, well, if Elon Musk can get rid of it, then why can't we? Why don't we spend less on it? And that happens, right? So you cannot trust these companies to do themselves unless they believe the same things that you do, but at the same time, they're also profit driven. So even if they have those beliefs, they still care about the bottom line. So I think, there needs to be examples made of these companies. They respond to financial incentives and political incentives. So they need to be fined for allowing hate speech, political disinformation to proliferate. And the only way to do that, because the Americans aren't going to do it, is to see it come out of other places. And we see the Digital Services Act in Europe being one way to exercise leverage. Even the UK has the online safety bill. And I do think ultimately governments, whether as a bloc as the EU or individually, you say, listen, if you want to access our market, because again, this is the free market of speech, not free speech. If you want to access our market, you have to show a degree of responsibility and be accountable. And I think, that is one way. There's other ways too that I think create a good faith relationship between these companies and people that don't necessarily have to go through this censorship type. And I say censorship, I mean sort of fining and accountability approach. But you could say, well, this system was better if you claim to be a public square or a town square, then you need to engage with the public in a way, right? For example, give them the data for free to hold them accountable, right? Why are you hiding that data? You claim you're a public service, so share the data that allows you to hold you to account, right? The whole point of a civil society or a democracy is to be able to hold the people in charge accountable. So why don't social media companies run by the same logic? So you could even create laws that force a level of accountability where you're saying, we're not necessarily going to fine you all the time for allowing this, but we're going to force you to be more, have a more public service orientation, right? So there's different ways, and we could list them forever, but I think there needs to be basically regulation. And I think we need to move away from the debate that's free speech versus not free speech, because these are private companies that are profiting off our data, and it's the free market of speech. The free speech argument is a distraction. Free speech existed before social media companies. There's plenty of social media platforms. Regulating one, they're not going to go anywhere, right? So, and the other solution as well is that, do we try to create some sort of system where we create our own platform? There's been attempts like Mastodon to create these federations, but basically the platforms that exist everywhere, and we can use them. We don't have to use X. We don't have to use Meta. But at the same time, they've become sort of what feel like an indispensable part of our lives. But ultimately, if they're going to be these disinformation delivery systems, we're going to have to stop using them. So we either stop using them or try to make them better. And to make them better, we really need to hold them accountable. And to hold them accountable, we need our governments to do something.
Marc Owen Jones, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your insight and your time today.
No, thank you. It's been great talking to you. And I'm sorry my cats didn't make much of an appearance.
Next time we'll have a panel of experts.
yeah. Panel of cats. That'll be fun.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Big Picture, and a big thank you to our guest today, Marc Owen Jones. You can follow along with all of his analysis on his page on X, as well as our ongoing coverage of both the riots here in the UK, as well as what is happening with the far right and the anti-Muslim hatred spread online. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We want to know what you have to say about this fascinating conversation. And as always, you can listen to this episode on all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts from. And until next time, Salam.